Hello, my name's Bill. I have been 30 days clean from Final Fantasy XIV. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Did It All for the Moogle, a very serious podcast. And today we have a very serious topic, which is the Final Fantasy XIV expansion, Dawntrail. And as I go into games, expansions, or whatever that are of some importance to me, I go in with a series of questions. I did the same thing for Persona 3, and obviously this is not going to have as big of an analysis as Persona 3 did, so don't worry about the runtime there. But I do have some questions because I'm at a crossroads with Final Fantasy XIV where I'm basically at a point of, do I keep playing and devoting my effort and money into this game, or do I cut my losses and run for the hills? Mostly because of how awful Endwalker was from a game design perspective. And I've harped on this a lot, and it's probably close to 2 hours of the whole version of my thoughts on Endwalker in an episode of the Dead End Road Show called The Great Final Fantasy XIV Rant, which is getting some traffic on YouTube for some reason right now. So you can go check that out for most of the thoughts on that. But it basically boils down to job design, specifically healers. And so I was going into Dawntrail with a series of questions that I needed answers to, and those answers would dictate my approach to the game moving forward. And basically, is there anything going to be redeeming about job design? Specifically, anything redeeming about healer design at all to make healers worth playing? They were introducing a new job, Pictomancer. Is Pictomancer good enough to play? Can I be a one-trick pony and just play Pictomancer and be satisfied? Is the story good enough to hook me? Have they changed enough of the battle content? These were the questions that I needed answers to. And so this was my approach, basically, is if the jobs were good, I'm happy. I'm sticking around. I could play the battle content. I could have fun with the jobs. If the battle content has changed in a way where it's engaging and I'm not, in game director Yoship's words, falling asleep, then I'm good. You know, the story is whatever. I enjoy the story. It is a draw for me, but is not like the main thing that I focus on. I have played through all of the story. I have never been a story skipper up until, I guess, patch 6. Maybe 6.2, 6.3, where the Golbez shit just was going nowhere and was dragging on, and it was legitimately boring me to tears. Then I became a story skipper. I was not planning on skipping the Dawntrail story because this was the beginning of a new arc, you know, a new land, all that jazz. I was not planning on skipping the story, but I'm not a very big nitty-gritty lore person in 14. I'm not specifically attached to any specific characters. I don't get into it that deeply the way a lot of the game's fan base does, where people think it's like the greatest story ever told. Some people say it's the greatest Final Fantasy story in the whole series. I don't go that far. I think the story is good. I think it's serviceable. I think that it is very good for an MMO story. I do not go so far as to say that it's even a great story for a game. I think it is good for an MMO story. Because a lot of the times in this genre, stories are just there to get you from point A to point B, rather than, you know, flexing some kind of narrative storytelling capacity. And so I think the story from ARR to Endwalker was well told. I think the more I think about Endwalker, the less I like it from a narrative perspective. The way that they had to tie things up I think it got too emotionally manipulative. The Elpis shit, I think, was kind of hackneyed, especially the more I think about it. I think it got too fan servicey, but I thought it, on the whole, worked. But this is a new start, right? This is supposed to be maybe the start of a new arc, or just maybe just a new one-off adventure kind of thing. New continent, new lands, gonna meet new people, that whole thing. My first note here, however, is holy shit, the story is really bad. Now, man. It's I'm just gonna rip the band-aid off here. It's not just bad for Final Fantasy XIV, which, yes, it is. It's not just bad for an MMO story. Yes, it is. It is just plain bad from a narrative perspective. It is bad from a storytelling perspective. It is bad from a basic competency writing perspective. It is bad from an audience engagement perspective. It is bad from a gameplay perspective, for keeping the player engaged in its story. Okay? It is bad from a sensical perspective. It is comically bad. And I know this seems like I'm exaggerating. I know there's a lot of people dogpiling on the story. I know there's people dogpiling on specific characters. One specific character in particular, which we'll get to. I know there's people dogpiling on specific voice actors. I'm not even going to go that far. I'm going to talk about the narrative itself. Okay? And what it's trying to accomplish. Because it's a Frankenstein creation that tries to go in so many different directions and goes fucking nowhere. I just mentioned this, where it's like MMO stories function to get the player from A to B. On a basic level, this barely does that. Because the A to B doesn't make any sense. The A to B is basically like, why am I here as a player character? Why am I doing this? I don't need to be here. Me, as a player character, I'm not even involved in these events. I should just go fuck off. The events that are taking place are not my problem. I'm just watching what's unfolding. Then you get to the fact that the second half, which is remotely an improvement on the narrative, and it's kind of the second half, the latter portion, let's say, the latter portion of the main scenario quest, which is what it's called in Final Fantasy XIV. And if you don't know that, I don't know why you're sticking around, but I appreciate it. The second portion, which is marginally more interesting, just apes its whole deal from Final Fantasy IX, openly so, right? It's an entire reference to Final Fantasy IX, but it's just redoing Final Fantasy IX. So even the part that is slightly better can be attributed to a different game. And that's a game that, me personally, I don't even like, by the way, which I know is probably sacrilege. I know that game has a massive, fan base, and they're going to get their remake very soon, it seems like. So the story is, it is so bad, it forced me to start skipping cutscenes. I felt forced to in order to keep my own sanity. And again, I had never been a story skipper in this game before. Even back in A Realm Reborn, which people say is so slow and it's a slog, and I played back whenever there was the 200 side quests, 200 quests in the gap between A Realm Reborn to Heavensward, and I did all of that before they condensed it down. So I've paid my dues, right? And I very much play games for the stories that they tell. I think me talking about Persona 3 for however many ungodly hours that recording took is a testament to that. I'm not a person that's just like, oh, let me get to the gameplay. I just couldn't take it anymore the story was not just spinning its wheels, it was going nowhere. I felt like I was a captive. I was just constantly asking myself, when do I get to play? When do I get to play the game? Because, like I said, this is not just a bad story from also a narrative perspective, which it is. It's a bad story from a gameplay perspective. Because you're just stuck there, just watching this shit. And all of the quest objectives are talk to this person, talk to that person, talk to these 3 townsfolk, talk to these 3 townsfolk. And this is back to back to back, right? They have stripped to the bone any form of gameplay in between the quests. So they've removed any sort of basic MMO questing, which would be like, oh, kill these 3 goblins or whatever. You don't do any of that anymore. Pick up these 3 boxes. You don't do any of that anymore. These, while basic and repetitive and often critiqued, still kind of had a function where they would allow you a reprieve from the constant dialogue and cutscenes, where you could just, okay, and sort of digest what just happened, or, you know, let something sit with you. Even if it wasn't a big revelation, it would just allow you a moment's peace with maybe you and your player character. Now you don't get any of that. You might as well be like playing the camera from Super Mario 64, right? You're not playing Mario, you're the camera. You're just sort of watching all of this shit. You have no input, you have no say. You are the avatar of your computer monitor. You are just watching this shit. And it's highly, highly frustrating. I cannot stress that enough. For an MMO where you create your own character, and I'm not even a role player, right? There are people that go that far where they have entire backstories and entire little mini worlds that they've created for their own characters. I cannot imagine how frustrating that must be. To just be sat there while all this shit's happening and you do nothing. Absolutely nothing. You have no effect, you have no input. There are very dramatic events that happen in the cutscenes. Sometimes they don't even cut over in the cutscene to your player character. You're unseen. It is highly bizarre. It is like these cutscenes are from an entirely different game. It is highly, highly bizarre. Sometimes they'll cut to your player character, and it's like, oh, I'm actually here. I'm actually here. Am I doing anything? No. No, I'm not. Not at all. It's really strange. And I have to say, a marked difference from previous expansions. And yes, previous expansions, especially Shadowbringers and Endwalker, did focus more on the player character and the player character's role within this world. So yes, this is in stark contrast, but this is even in contrast to previous expansions where the player character was not quote-unquote the main character. I cannot stress that enough. In Heavensward, in Stormblood, we were not the main character, but we were still involved in the events of the narrative. In Dawntrail, we do not exist. It is so bizarre. But like I said, it's jarring, and I think it'll especially be jarring for a lot of people that began. There was a massive influx of players in Shadowbringers, in Endwalker, where the story, especially in Shadowbringers, like, had these very thoughtful, like, mediations on your role as a hero in the world and what that means as a player character in a massively multiplayer role-playing game where you, by definition, cannot be the sole hero. And now you're not even relegated to like a side character, like as you were in Heavensward, Stormblood, Realm Reborn, where you're just kind of a nobody working your way up. You're a fucking background actor that doesn't even always react to events. Like, in the most literal sense, you are in the background, sometimes completely unseen. The moment that completely broke me, completely ruined this whole thing for me, it was a mid-level cutscene. I think it was maybe around level 90, 94. Don't quote me on that, though. So, like, the actual main character of the entire expansion, Wuk Lamat, which we'll get to that, hold on, is confronting her brother, and it's supposed to be this very climactic sequence, and it's going to set the stage for basically the rest of the expansion story. The player character is there, technically, but it's basically like they're watching a play unfold. And so you, as the player character behind the screen, have just as much to do with the dialogue and confrontation as your in-game avatar does. You know, there's like clashing of swords, there's a fight going on, there's a child in danger, and your character just sort of stands there with their fist clenched, and that's it. And then, in perhaps this moment of like twisted self-awareness, the writer of the scene suddenly has a character address the player character. Maybe to see if, like, you know, you're still like fucking paying attention to the game. And so the way the game works is, like, throughout the story from 2.0 all the way through all content, side quests, role quests, all kinds of shit, you're often given dialogue choices. 99% of the time, these are completely arbitrary and meaningless, and they don't change any events or have an effect on what happens, right? Because it'd be impossible to make that many branching paths of content for an MMO. That's just not possible. But they still allow you to play your character, you know, like it's a role-playing game, and give you a better sense of who it is you're playing, right? And so here we are in a cutscene being directly addressed. We are being asked about how we would have handled certain events to avoid a specific outcome. And so I'm going to get set. I'm like all set to look over my dialogue options to respond to this direct address to me. And there weren't any. There was nothing to pick. Like, there were no dialogue options. They just moved it along. What the fuck? A character was acknowledging me for the first time in the entire game. Like, this is the first part of the scene where anybody even notices that we're there. Like, we weren't hiding or anything. Asks us a very blunt, direct question. How would you have handled this? And the game does not give me any way to respond, to play my character, to react to any way within the game. What a fucking shame. What a disappointment. And then the play continues. Without anything from me, the player. Nothing from my character. Continues on like nothing happened. Horrible. Horrible, horrible, horrible. The story doesn't need to be focused on the Warrior of Light, on the player character to be successful. Because again, it wasn't solely focused on us in the early expansions. In fact, it would have been a welcome change of pace if the player character is treated like some average schmuck again. But no, it's still the case where we get smoke constantly blown up our asses. Like, anytime we are addressed, it's like, oh, you're this great hero, blah, 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 blah. Oh, you're so strong, nobody can defeat you. It's like, okay, whatever. Yes, I'm a special snowflake. It's gotten really old and rings very hollow, and it's very pandering. And the audience that it's pandering to eats that shit up. And it's just indicative of a lot of the fluff that Dawntrail is stuffed with. Yes, your favorites are eating tacos. Why are they here in this new world? To fill out the trust system, really. There's not much else reason for the Scions to be here. The story also didn't need to have the same kind of cataclysmic threat that, we just sort of ended a 10-year arc with. We didn't need to save the universe again for the story to be good, which I see a lot as like a defense of the expansion. It's like, oh, well, we didn't need to have a giant world-ending threat. This was just a smaller stakes thing. I hear that word a lot, stakes, and I don't think people necessarily know what that means in terms of narrative. It's like stakes can be very personal. Conflict can be very personal. Character interaction, character problems, character arcs. Dawntrail is severely lacking in character arcs. Characters start one way and end the same way. That's not good. That's not good at all. Of course, it doesn't need to have, the biggest universe-eating threat to be good. Guess what? Dawntrail has a universe-eating threat. And it's bad. It's bad. We do this again. And a weird twist, it's also really close to the conditions from Shadowbringers that was going to end the world. It's like almost the exact same thing. And Shadowbringers was the other expansion that referenced FF9. The expansion that has a dungeon named Memoria, that whole thing. And here the story's just dull, and it's like, well, we kind of already did this. So, yeah, world-ending threat happens again. It's boring. Those people are actually correct when they talk about stakes. It's like, yes, we have world-ending stakes, and it sucks. And whenever the expansion focuses on the personal, there's no character arc here. And so you're just kind of left with this wet noodle of, what are we doing here? I kind of just mentioned the Scions. Before the expansion's release, I was kind of upset at the trailers. Sort of annoyed that the Scions, who are essentially stand-ins for party members in a traditional Final Fantasy game or a traditional RPG, they're still just riding our coattails, because their individual stories have pretty much wrapped up an expansion or two ago, and all of their personalities are just reduced to a single character trait or two, or a meme, at this point. So I kind of wanted to see some new faces, some new characters being brought into the fold, because the Scions are basically a relic of a 10-year-old story that just concluded. In the end of Endwalker, they were basically like, yeah, our job's done. We're disbanding, whether we needed to or not. And then immediately in 6.1, they're like, let's get the band back together. And it was pretty silly then, and it's kind of silly now. But then, little did I know, here in Dawntrail, they've basically been reduced to furniture. They have as much input and usefulness as the player character does. I kind of said this earlier, but their inclusion is basically to fill out the ranks of the trust system, which is the gameplay feature in which players can avoid playing an MMO by completing story dungeons and trials with a party of NPCs rather than, real people. It's also serves as a function for whenever the game is on life support, that the game can kind of still be played. Final Fantasy XIV is coming off of 2 expansions where it saw the most concurrent and most active service players ever, and they spent time developing that system. So, yeah. Otherwise, it makes no sense for the Scions to be here. There are scenes where they just sort of materialize behind you after you made this trek through a very difficult to reach location, simply because there's a dungeon coming up, and so you're going to need the trust system if you're using the trust system. So they have to be there. And so, a sane individual might ask, like, well, what the hell's taking up all this screen time? This game runs for the length of a full RPG. So, like, what the hell what is actually going on? If there's no gameplay, what's all this blabbering about? What could possibly make the main story of the world's second most popular MMO, praised critically and virally for its story, is not just an MMO, but as one of the better entries in a franchise that's been going for like 40 fucking years. I mentioned her before, but the answer is Wuk Lamat, who is the main character, the actual focal point, the alpha and the omega of Dawntrail. Wuk Lamat is clearly one of the writer's stand-in OCs. Please do not steal. I truly wish I had $1 for every time there was a quest objective that said speak to Wuk Lamat, because I'm sure that it would cover the cost of my subscriptions for the entire run of this expansion, which I will remind you is about 3 years is how long this expansion will last. And I did have to look this up, actually, and I think some other people were curious too. There are some conflicting reports, but it's apparently around 150 times, plus or minus 15, because I saw maybe like 170. So there are maybe 150 instances of speak to Wuk Lamat in quest objectives. And so that's good for about 12 months of playtime at $1 each. And so on the that's with the entry subscription with no additional retainers added to your account. So I was a little off. I guess 3 years. It's only good for 1 year. I couldn't even write notes about Wuk Lamat because it would just keep going on and on. Much like her dialogue. The issues with Wuk Lamat are not that she's the main character. It's the fact that you're joined at the hip to her. So if you don't like her, you're going to have an incredibly bad time. She is written in such a way that it makes it very difficult to like her. So it seems like a lot of people, myself very much included, do not like her. And she's not written in a way where you are like, you're meant to dislike her. I have to make that very clear. I think it's very much the opposite, where you're actually meant to like her. There are parts where she's meant to be comedic, and you're meant to find that charming. You're meant to sympathize with her plight. They do a horrific job of this. You are meant to see her weakness. There's actually one instance of where you have a dialogue choice, which is not really a dialogue choice because both dialogue options say the same thing, where you get to tell her father that she's not ready for the throne, which is sort of this is your objective through the first half of the expansion. You have to basically make sure that she is a successor, to her father's throne, and you tell him that she's not ready. The game is aware that she's immature and not ready, but you're supposed to still guide her through that. The issue is, again, that she doesn't ever change as a person or grow. She's exactly the same as when you meet her. She doesn't mature at all. So it's very frustrating. It's like you spend all this time with her and you don't have an impact on her. Because again, you don't have any input as a player. You're just kind of along for the ride. It's like, in those sort of like Old West kind of things where they would tie somebody to a horse and then just drag them through the desert. That's kind of what the story is like. Only you're attached to Wuk Lamat and you're just dragged through. And any time you think you got away, she just appears, or she's not even there, and then somebody's like, oh, you should talk to Wuk Lamat about this. And you're like, brother, she's not even in this zone. Why do I have to go to talk to her about it? She's got nothing to do with this. It's like, nah, you gotta fill her in. She's got to know about this. It's very important. There are some times, and I know I keep harping on this, where you will have to talk to Wuk Lamat back to back in the exact same location. So you just talked to her, you had some dialogue with her, and then you have to click on her again and talk to her some more. It's, again, not just bad from storytelling, but also from gameplay. You don't do anything. It's just highly frustrating. They couldn't be bothered to move her to a different location and then talk to her somewhere else. Like, I don't know if they're just out of gas or what. At Creative Business Unit 3. There's a Creative Studio 3 now. I can't keep up. Square changes their naming scheme a little too frequently. So you learn some things about Wuk Lamat pretty quickly. It's that she loves her people because she's a princess, and she loves peace. And you will hear those two things perhaps hundreds of times, because those are the only thoughts she has. And she will tell you her thoughts. And that's kind of it. But for somebody that loves her people, she doesn't know anything about them. And so while you think that, she's going to guide you through these lands as a tour guide and you're going to learn about these new people and everything, instead, you're the one that has to inform her about the people and their cultures that she should know as their princess, who will then become their queen. It's really weird because a lot of times, like, the way a lot of these expansions work whenever you're going to a new place is like they're fish out of water stories, right? Where it's a new place, and so you have no idea what's going on or how the customs work and everything, and you quickly meet somebody there that is sympathetic to you, who will be your guide. It was the same thing in Heaven's Ward, same thing in Stormblood, multiple times in Stormblood, because that expansion was split into multiple places. Same thing in Shadowbringers. Endwalker, not as much, but you get my... Actually, yeah, no, same thing in Endwalker. You get my point. You need somebody to guide you, to show you these different places and cultures and blah, 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 blah. Here, you think that's going to happen, but your tour guide is a moron. And so you have to do the legwork for her, which involves frequently talking to 3 locals and then reporting back to her what she should have already knew. It's really dumb. It's just... there's just a horrific overdose of her. And every time you think you're finally free, she just shows up. Like, the second half of the story has nothing to do with her. Absolutely nothing to do with her. But she's still there. Her part has concluded. Spoilers, but it doesn't matter, because, come on, you put her on the throne with her brother, who was the more sensible one, but that was the way the story was going. You could see it a mile away. It was telegraphed. It's very amateur writing through the whole thing. There's this whole thing about 2 heads, one being the reason and one being the other thing, being the happy or something. Whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The brother's the reason and she's the doofus. Whatever. And so you have to install both of them as the king and the queen, even though they're brother and sister. Whatever. Don't think about it too hard. It's really stupid. And and so you do that, and it's like, okay, great, done. That part of the story's over. Now we have to do Final Fantasy IX again. So you do Final Fantasy IX, and she's still fucking there. She's still there. Why are you here? Your part's over. We're in the cyberpunk land. It's got nothing to do with you. But no, she insists upon herself. She inserts herself into the narrative where she does not belong anymore. They just didn't know what to do with her. It's highly frustrating because this was the expansion where they're like, okay, now this is going to be Kryle's term in the spotlight. This is the Kryle expansion. Kryle's here. She's got nothing to do. She's got nothing to say. Something with her parents. It doesn't matter. This is the Wuk Lamat hour. This is the Wuk Lamat expansion. You got to talk to her all the damn time. Kryle, doesn't matter. Something with your grandpa. You pass through the dimensional rift. It doesn't matter. It's Wuk Lamat time. We got Catboy eating ice cream. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. And I'm gonna spoil the final trial because whatever. If you care, you've probably already done it. And if you don't care, I don't know how you listen to 40 minutes of this, but I appreciate it. In the final trial, you gotta defeat the real evil because it's a JRPG, and so you're doing that, you know, because only you alone could do this. Only you and 8 other real people could do this. I guess 7, but you know what I mean. Only you and 7 other people could do this. And you're doing it. The trial's actually fun. You know, you're doing a thing. They got some new visual markers for old mechanics, and it feels fresh. And you're doing the thing. You're doing the battle. The music's kicking in. You know, you're getting hit with damage because people don't know how to heal anymore. And you're getting the boss to low HP, and then all of a sudden I wish I was making it up. I really wish I was making it up. All of a sudden you get a cutscene, and then Wuk Lamat literally breaks glass, breaks in, and then gets the last hit on the boss and steals your kill when you were having a great time. I'm just like, and everybody I was in the call with was like, oh, you're shitting me. I can't believe this. What is she doing here? I almost turned off my PC. I really did. I was like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. People harp on the voice actor for Wuk Lamat. I don't think it sounds good either, but like, I have more problems with the character than I do the voice actor, the performance. I do think it sounds like a put-on accent. I think it's low on the list of problems. I think the character is just bad start to finish, you know, like, because then people start getting into waters where like, because the voice actor's trans. You know, I didn't even know that. I'm not on Twitter, right? I didn't even know who the voice actor was. I don't look into it. It doesn't matter. I think the character from a narrative design perspective, from a writing perspective, from the insistence upon it, the character being the main character, inserting into gameplay, from a lack of gameplay to then inserting into the one slice of gameplay we get is the issue. I don't care if the voice actor's trans. Yeah, the accent's bad. They said some stupid stuff on Twitter. It doesn't affect me. That part doesn't affect my gameplay experience. What do I care? Yes, the ending song is really bad and doesn't belong. No, it's not black gospel music. I don't give a fuck. That has no effect. People just love to type shit on Twitter, man. That's basically what I have to say about this story. It's a fucking tragedy. It's really bad. Anybody that tries to downplay how bad it is in defense mode. It is. If anybody's played an MMO and felt bored by doing fetch quests, this is that, but turbo. Because you think you don't want fetch quests. You think you don't want to do anything. You just want to get through the story, blah, 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 blah. You don't just want dialogue and cutscenes. You don't. You want to actually do something. You want to play some game in your game. Because when you don't have game and you get shitty writing, you get Dawntrail, and it's a goddamn joke. But at the end of the day, once you get through the story's over, and then you only get tiny little bits in the patches. You know, the story being bad on its own is not going to make me quit, right? But like, how's the rest of the game? Like, how are the healers? Well, the way they design the healers made me not touch the healers. So if that's indicative of anything. So basically, they continued everything that sucked from Endwalker with regards to combat. Well, to job design, I should say, where we still have 2-minute bursts, and they've just sort of quadrupled down on that. They didn't give healers any additional offensive tools except for buttons you hit every 2 minutes. And that sucks a lot because you only get a fun thing to do every 2 minutes, which was kind of already the case because on healers like White Mage, like Scholar, like Astro, I guess it's all of them, like Sage, you would just save the tiny little bit of offense you had for 2 minutes anyway. So it's kind of nothing. And the way that they've designed shield versus pure healing just means that shield healers are just so much better because shield healers have all of this mitigation, and then you also just gave them a fuck ton of pure healing anyway, so they can just handle everything. And of course, there's also a bug, though, where they fucked up the scaling of pets, because this is what they always do. Because for whatever reason, pets scale 70% less potency than the player character, so that affects fairy healing, that affects summoner damage, that affects, oddly enough, Astro's earthly star, and I think a ninja thing. So that's been out of whack for 2 months, I suppose. The Astro rework, Jesus Christ. The Astro WeWork, the cooperative living or co-working space that got at least 2 documentaries, is a fucking joke. You basically, it's basically Aetherflow, but single target, and you don't get to choose what you do. The cards are a joke. They don't know what to do with Astro. They'll rework it again next expansion. Meanwhile, while the Shadowbringers cards were not as good as Stormblood, they were at least functional. There was no reason to change them in Endwalker. Whenever the system worked in Shadowbringers, they got rid of sleeve draw. Astrodyne was a mistake. Now I don't even know what the fuck the point of pulling cards once every 60 seconds is. So now you're no longer like a card slinger. You're just better White Mage with a card every 60 seconds. It's a joke. They don't know what to do with healers. I don't think anybody on their staff actually plays healers. I truly don't. The fact that you like add an additional cooldown to a cooldown that you can use every 2 minutes just completely ruins any flexibility. I don't know why they think it's like you have to unlock a cooldown by using another cooldown. Well, what if you don't need that second cooldown? And that's just healers. Otherwise, most jobs are basically identical from Endwalker. But don't worry. They were getting so much backlash from people saying, hey, this shit kind of sucks. Jobs aren't really fun. Don't worry, we're going to fix that in 8.0. Just wait 3 fucking years. Because we can't... It takes us too fucking long to develop content, and we can't do jobs at the same time because we have like 3 dudes that work on 20 jobs, and they only play 3 of them. So basically, I needed Picto to save the expansion for me, which is what I figured. The good news is that Pictomancer is really fun. They basically put all of their creative energy for all of the jobs, especially Caster, into Pictomancer. Pictomancer basically plays the way old Summoner used to, where you were building up like this abilities to build up your summons and then unleash them during burst. And it's really fun. You have a lot of options. You have to prepare your movement. You have to actually prepare your buff instead of just hitting it every 2 minutes. It's really fun. It's the best job in the game, and it also does the best damage, but that's sort of a side effect. I would still play it if it did shit damage, to be honest with you. It's just really fun because you can still like fuck things up and like recover. And your opener, you can kind of do things in any order as long as you hit the buttons you need to hit. So it's not like super fucking rigid, which is sort of the way old Summoner was, where you still needed to hit the right buttons and make sure you had enough Ruin 4 stacks. But as long as you had them for your burst and then you had your Dreadworm Trance at the right time, you would get your burst off. And everybody likes getting their burst off, right? So it's really good. Even at that point, like just having one job to play, just to do the same old content over and over again, isn't quite enough. Like the whole point of sacrificing job changes and individual job identity is supposedly to focus on this improved and engaging combat encounters and the slightly increased difficulty of those encounters. So in Yoship's own words, we don't quote unquote fall asleep. Like they said, yes, we went too far in Endwalker, shit was too boring, too easy. So it's like, okay, well, what are these fights like? You know, what's going on? Nothing has been mind-blowing. They aren't doing anything that's like super new with mechanics or even boss arenas. Instead, mechanics are happening just a little faster. And then gone is like the Endwalker slow, repeated tutorialization phases where a mechanic will be shown, and then the real version of it, which would be either a harder hitting or variation with, you know, like say multiple hits of it, would come out later. And so you learned by seeing it the first time, and then it's like, okay, now I know how to do it, and now I can get the hard version, right? So mechanics are still tutorialized, but now they're maybe only shown once, and then perhaps quickly, and then only to be followed by the real version. So on the whole, fights are better. Like dungeons, trials, and raids on normal difficulty at least are faster. They're more engaging and like a touch more dangerous, like with the damage they deal. But also this is playing at lower item levels. But at the same time, don't misunderstand, this is like not an improvement. This is a reset. So all this means is that we're back to Shadowbringers levels rather than, you know, new territory. The expansion number has taken 2 steps forward, but the content is now back to where we were in Shadowbringers. So Dawntrail is, in fact, Shadowbringers 3.0. As far as extremes go, they're probably about the same in terms of difficulty for the first 2 trials of an expansion. Mechanics happen like a touch faster. Otherwise, it's probably about the same. The first extreme trial has 1 mechanic, and this is the one that everybody seems to point to. It's the tank buster, where the tanks have to stand in front and physically block the damage with their, you know, player character model, and this shields the rest of the party from the attack. And the party, and they have to swap between each tank blocking this attack, and the party has to get behind them and also change the angle of the attack so everybody doesn't get hit. And so it makes the tanks feel important because they have to literally shield everybody, and the party is still engaged because if they don't get behind the tank, they die. So it's the kind of like mechanic design that has been missing from the game for a very long time. Like there are still tank busters, or I guess party stacks in the game that are called wild charges, where tanks have to be in front, otherwise the party takes more damage. But the way that this is visually set up and the way that it is more physical in the arena is something that we don't see. And it sounds very simple. It's like, oh yeah, well of course the tank has to take damage for the party, but in this game it's more of a separate thing where tanks take damage separately from the party, if that makes sense. Like they have to have aggro, and then they'll have a tank buster attack them. It's never quite so much it's like, oh, get behind me party kind of thing. So this was sort of like maybe the first instance of like that, other than wild charges. But yeah, that's kind of it. And if it tells you anything, like I stopped raiding, so I didn't raid this tier, mostly because the normals didn't impress me very much, and then I sort of watched some streams and stuff, and the raids didn't look all that interesting. I like the savage versions. So yeah. So where does that leave us? Or I guess me. Where does that leave me? So I gave the game a month, and the love's gone. It's it's not there. I saw the need to make like a set of crafting gear, meld the crafting materia, make the gear, food, and potions all before raids came out, and I was just like, I don't want to do any of that. I don't want to do any of that. That doesn't sound fun. I don't want to raid. I don't want to cap tomes every week running the same dungeons, the same 2 fucking dungeons every week, every day for every week. I don't want to do the normal raids every week just to get the sword, to get a tome weapon after 7 weeks. And if I miss a week, I'm technically behind. I just don't care anymore. I have like literally hundreds of games in my backlog, and 14 is just in the way of a lot of that. It like might seem dramatic, you know, if like I'm handing in my resignation letter or something, but yeah, like this game has been a part of my life for 7 years. 7 years. And during the pandemic, raiding and like free company events were essentially my social life. And then 14 was also like the primary way for me to hang out with my out-of-state sister. Sorry for telling you about Moogles and fat cats and getting you into the game, chum. That's on me. So in those ways, it is more than a game. And I do recognize how silly it is to keep trying to find ways to hang on to the game, because it is just a game. Like, I didn't wring my hands this hard about quitting a game whenever I stopped playing RuneScape as a kid. I just like stopped playing either gradually or all at once. And maybe it's the same thing now, because it feels like it happened gradually and then suddenly. I gotta clear out my house. Damn it. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. See, I could do short episodes. Isn't that something? Next time, I'm going to be talking about SMT Vengeance. Specifically, the ways in which a fanbase can spin a re-release to fit its narratives. People like to play both sides, so they always end out on top. So check out that soon. Check out the Dead End Road Show if you appreciate this type of discussion, except about how the internet's dying and we're all doomed. Also books sometimes. It depends. If you missed that mammoth Persona 3 Reload episode, I don't blame you personally. The runtime is pretty stupid, but I did go to great lengths to make it understandable to someone that hasn't played the game before. So give it a shot and utilize the timestamps. It's also spoiler free, which I somehow managed to do. And also more Persona 3 very soon, because the answer episode, I guess, is out tomorrow as of me recording this. And I have a feeling that's coming out exactly when I need it to. And also, I like to put my apologies at the ends now, because any potential new listeners aren't scared away by me talking about how long it takes to get out episodes. Yeah, but my health had a backslide, and so it's difficult for me to sit at a desk for long periods of time, which is kind of a first world problem, but also it's the exact kind of problem that makes recording a bullshit podcast difficult. So, because yeah, I've had 2 episodes worth of notes done for months at this point. So it's very frustrating. What are your thoughts? Do you play Final Fantasy 14? Or are you interested in Final Fantasy 14? Let me know at podcast@denroad.media. And yeah, send anything that way. And I will see you very soon, where we talk about SMT 5 Vengeance. And also very soon, Persona 3 Reload. The answer episode, I guess. They do not make those titles easy, but what are you going to do? It's JRPGs. All right, see you in the next one.